2019 saw more Marcus Aurelius videos than 2008 saw cardboard boxes. I feel it's part of the initiation ceremony to the self-dev world that I talk about Marcus Aurelius, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. In truth, when I climbed my way through Meditations, the only thought I really had was that his writing had the consistency of underwhelming scrambled egg. You can quite clearly see how Mr. Aurelius had neither no intention for his work to be read by anyone else except him, and so I feel for the poor lad a bit, since his 2,000-year-old personal scribbles are now breakfast reading material for the self-dev YouTubers. And even though Marcus's reign saw the end of the Fantastic Five, and saw a successor who for recreational activities would stab bears in the Colosseum while frothing at the mouth, there are quite a few life advice gems to be seen in his private works. As mentioned, since there's so much content on Meditations already, and that my love for social politics is more embedded than cash under a Greek man's mattress, I'm going to focus on how 2,000-year-old advice can broadly help you in work politics and social relations in general. Also, I will use a flurry of quotes if they emphasize a similar point, and I'm going to be quite liberal in my interpretation of his writings. I mean very. Does this mark this video completely and utterly pointless?
Possibly.
What is not harmful to the city does not harm the citizen either. All that happens to the individual is to the benefit of the whole.
This is the classic connection of the individual and the group. Aurelius is commentating on taking a holistic view of management. It's one of the key steps forward towards better political skill, which is understanding that every political action towards an individual will also have a secondary impact on those connected to him, her. Good strategy does not benefit from the initial impact, but more the second and third. You immediately start to think a few steps ahead of everyone else. We're so bogged down in mental everyday turmoil that they can't even think beyond their own toe. I'm focusing purposely on the idea of the quote rather than the actual point because I don't necessarily agree with it. If we go for the material and simple, e.g. the Colosseum, which was built roughly 100 years before Aurelius' co-reign began in 161 AD, while the Colosseum was not harmful to the city because it provided Saturday 12:30 kickoff entertainment for the masses, it was harmful to Christians when they were burnt alive like a Yankee candle. But I guess they're not citizens, so I don't know, I give up. Despite this poor analysis, I guess in a political sense it depends on the personalities and the size of the group. Because I'm not going to ignore that a macro policy like this is more applicable to a man who runs a classical empire compared to a man who runs a middle management team in Dover. Ultimately, what we can say is that when strategizing political approach, it's better to use the lens of the group first. When we focus on a broader outcome, we are less emotional. Without personal conflict, there's less investment. It will shift our vision a few steps ahead. Realize that we have a naturally narrow perception when conferring with the outcomes of our own actions. So similar to the media, we like dealing with individuals. When planning, try to think of the compounding effects to your actions. This also provides the added benefit of having further distance between instigation and liability.
When circumstances force you to some sort of distress, quickly return to yourself. Do not stay out of rhythm for longer than you must. You will master the harmony the more by constantly going back to it.
Politically, you have to be aware of expected behavior and you have to create a model for yourself. It's something you can do to control your social surroundings. If you don't, it's just poor control of emotion. People have an impression of you that they expect to be maintained. True or not, it doesn't really matter. When you deviate from this, people start asking questions. Marcus is referring to your consistent natural flow. Most people have a variation of this to fit into social surroundings. Some don't, and sometimes they're celebrated for it, but honestly, most are often ostracized. You may also be used as a scapegoat in this manner. Marcus is not so much focusing on, say, consistent behavior, but more so your own personal natural rhythm, which is, I guess, a variation of this. In a sense, this is creating momentum through consistency. It's fundamental to creating anything and having success. Consistency in behavior is also a requirement for surprise. In connection with the last point, people won't trust you if they find you to be too erratic. Unless that behavior is applied with, say, a friendly form of ignorance, consistency beats motivation. New Year's resolutions are absolute bin. When things go wrong, it's rarely an isolated event. Often negative events happen in patches a few at a time because when you're out of your natural rhythm, you are more vulnerable. You're less emotionally calibrated. You're more prone to making mistakes. People often say that they've had a bad day. They're often referring to numerous events. Note that when something disturbs our natural rhythm, you want to focus not so much on reacting back to the event that disturbed it in the first place, but on quickly returning to your normal, natural self. As Marcus mentions, if you train this like a muscle, it will get easier.
How cruel is it not to allow people to strive for what seems to them their interest and advantage? And yet in a way you are forbidding him to do this when you fuss that they are wrong. They are surely drawn to their own interest and advantage. But it is not actually so. Well then, teach them, show them. Do not fuss. Prove me wrong and show me my mistake in any thought in action, I shall gladly change. I seek the truth which never harmed anyone. The mark is to persist in one's own self-deception and ignorance.
How often is it that when faced with the issue of helping a colleague, we often see it as a chore, a distraction, something we don't really want to do? We have our own work to focus on. While that may be true, yet in reality, being able to provide someone with advice or guidance can actually be one of the most crucial opportunities to forge relationships, if done in the right way. This is not on the basis of the person's value. If you can create investment with more people, the more political power you have. When we do help someone, there's often two main ways we get our approach wrong, therefore losing the potential benefit we could have had. Firstly, we get aggravated by their inabilities, therefore coming across as arrogant and unresponsive. Second, we enjoy the ego boost too much. We take pride in their mental faculties, preventing the act of bridging the relationship through empathy. Well, as Marcus says, well then teach them, show them, do not fuss. Be patient, humble, give space and time, don't get frustrated. This isn't just about being nice. If you're seen to be a figure that can't be cooperated with, your political life is about as dead as Ukrainian pond life in 1986. If you help someone and don't make a big fuss, they will be grateful. They will like you more. Likewise, Marcus talks about how if someone can give thorough advice, will change. It may be painful for the ego, but it's better than stagnation. While I would add that in political scenarios, it's better not to focus on the quality of advice you receive. Be gracious in receiving any advice. It's more important to focus on the relationship and therefore compliment the person when he or she is giving the advice, rather than focusing on the advice itself. We often associate the ego with the receiving of advice. People hate being told what to do or that they are wrong. And this may be true, but we also forget how much the ego is involved in the giving of advice. We like to see people listening to our thoughts, and we take it personally if someone doesn't do what we say, regardless of there being no possible malice behind the decision. As a rule of thumb, never rubbish someone's advice in political scenarios. Always be grateful. Review the advice personally afterwards. You can discuss the manner of advice with them, but be careful not to be rough in your discourse. Always carry an air of gratitude and reflection in these style of discussions.
Do not be dilatory in action, muddles in conversation, or vague in thought. Don't let your mind settle into depression or elation. Allow some leisure in your life.
I think the Stoic Emperor hints at 3 points here, each combining to make a strong and healthy mind. Firstly, a nebulous and stuttering mind hinders self-analysis and strategy. Be aware that when analyzing, we often create narratives which are analytical to begin with, but eventually become a continuous echo as time moves on. Keep your thinking fresh, and stop using buzzwordery and antiquated talk as easy filler for vague thoughts. Think independently and be consistent. Use plenty of evidence to change your mind, but do not be obnoxiously stubborn. So when committing to an action, do so 100% or don't do it at all. Conviction is essential. Second, don't let your mind settle into depression or elation. I guess the benefits of not settling into depression is kind of obvious yet. That doesn't mean it's kind of common practice. And I don't mean clinical depression here. I just kind of mean that general negativity. Notice when your mood drops and try to regain balance. This is one that we can all work on. I do understand though that say for example the late Sir Roger Scruton, like many other conservative thinkers, argues that pessimism is in a natural sense practical. Your doubts make you free from delusion, and positive events act as a surprise. This can be true, however do not underestimate the practicality of positivity either. Likewise, don't fall into relation. It creates delusion and reduces creative sharpness. You see this a lot with the self-dev gurus, claiming that every video, product, blog post they do is amazing, cutting edge, the best one yet. Well, if that's the case, you have a low bar if you're able to raise it every time. I guess I'm condoning classic stoicism in the case of considered moderation. But as Marcus said, allow some leisure in your life. Use stoic philosophy as a tool, but don't use it as an excuse to become a boring dry biscuit. Self-dev should provide the freedom to have both structure and therefore enjoyment. Without darker, luxury kind of colours, life becomes dull textbook material. I'm reaching a bit here, but Harry Frenchman once said,
"Nothing is really beautiful, unless it is useless."
Look, I'm no expert on stoicism. I'm aware that even with Aurelius, I'm not digging very far. As a drunken scallywag, I don't naturally connect with stoicism. I recognise its importance and effectiveness, but perhaps I'm not wise enough to relish it. Much of classical thinking in self-dev takes its fashion as cafeteria-style pick and choose. There's a reality to this, so I'm not against it. But to always be rational is fool's gold. So regardless of the quality of this video, the advice I can give is to read the likes of Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus. Enjoy it, reflect on it, but only to the degree that you feel you need to personally. Don't use Aurelius as a personality trait.
It's 11 in the morning. Who's been drinking?